Siding with the state of Illinois over a gun and magazine ban enacted in January of 2023, the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals released their opinion in a case challenging the law Thursday. Now, the question is expected to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, which recently agreed to take up a separate case challenging Illinois' gun ban alongside a challenge to Connecticut's gun ban. Now, gun owners in Illinois have been on a roller coaster since the law was enacted in 2023. State-level challenges secured thousands of temporary restraining orders against the law before the state Supreme Court sided with the ban. In federal court, Southern District of Illinois Judge Stephen McGlynn issued a preliminary injunction in the spring of 2023, which lasted about a week before the appeals court reversed that preliminary injunction. Now, the case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court on those preliminary grounds until the summer of 2024, when SCOTUS decided to not take the case because they said it was on preliminary grounds and not on final judgment based on the merits. Now, the Southern District Illinois judge, Stephen McGlynn, he then held a 4-day bench trial in East St. Louis with thousands of pages of evidence and expert testimony heard in open court for and against the law. The district judge then ruled the law was unconstitutional in November of 2024. So the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, they sat on that appeal for months before hearing the case in September of 2025. The 3-judge panel released their ruling Thursday, 2-1, in favor of the law. Now, the majority opinion said, the Supreme Court has held that the rights secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. They said that, like the free speech clause, it does not enshrine an absolute right. They further said the Second Amendment does not secure a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. Now, just the level set. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Previous SCOTUS opinions on the Second Amendment question lay out how lower courts should handle such questions. They essentially said that the law should be judged on whether it comports to the Second Amendment text and whether there's a history and tradition of similar laws around the time of the founding of the nation 250 years ago. Now, back to the majority opinion from the Seventh Circuit Thursday. They said AR-15s are dangerous and similar to M16s, which are banned. They use the same ammunition, they said, and have 3 times the velocity of a standard handgun bullet. Now, further, the majority opinion said, because of dramatic technological changes since the founding, there are unprecedented societal concerns over mass shootings, and they say the frequency of such events has only increased over time. Again, that was from the majority opinion. But with these types of opinions, when it's a split panel, this one 2-1, in the dissenting opinion, the judge said the Second Amendment protects AR-15 rifles, which passes the dangerous and unusual test. They said millions of AR-15s are owned nationwide and laws prohibiting them are actually an outlier. The dissenting judge also said AR-15s are widely owned for self-defense and its features are not particularly useful for criminals. Further, the dissent said magazines, also part of Illinois' ban, are considered arms under the Second Amendment. The dissenting judge said that there's not a history or tradition of regulating magazines. And in conclusion, the dissenting judge said, Illinois has not shown that its restrictions are consistent with the country's history and tradition of weapons regulations. The most common firearms Illinois banned, the AR-15 and its magazine, are not dangerous and unusual, the judge said. They're in common use and owned for self-defense. Illinois' ban goes too far, the judge said, and should be enjoined as unconstitutional. Again, the next steps in this case expected to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's unclear if plaintiffs in the Barnett v. Raoul case, which actually brings in 4 cases together, will be asked for the entire Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to hear the case, or if they'll just take that opinion from the 3-judge panel and go right to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, Governor J.B. Pritzker posted on social media after Thursday's ruling was released, saying, quote, Illinois will continue banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines capable of inflicting mass casualties, a victory in the fight to end gun violence that helps our communities stay safe. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul said that the opinion is a win that enhances public safety in Illinois. He said that we have seen the damage that assault weapons and large capacity magazines can inflict, and these weapons of war have no place in our communities. Raoul said his office has successfully defended the state's prohibition on these weapons in both state and federal courts, and he says he's immensely proud of the hardworking attorneys in his office who've worked diligently to preserve the critical public safety measure. But gun rights advocates disagree and believe the U.S. Supreme Court will correct the appeals court. The Firearms Policy Coalition, President Brandon Combs, issued this statement, quote, the Constitution does not permit governments to outlaw these firearms and magazines, full stop. He said, nor does it allow judges to substitute their personal policy preferences for the scope of the rights the Constitution enshrined, or to ignore the test the Supreme Court's repeatedly required. The Supreme Court now has the opportunity to restore order to a body of law that some lower courts have treated as optional. When it does, opinions like this will serve as little more than historical reminders of how far some courts were willing to go to deny Americans the exercise of fundamental constitutional rights. So we'll be watching closely as to the next steps in this case, and we'll bring it all to you here with the states.